new series, and I get to introduce Michael Amico, who is our speaker. If you get, as just a sidebar, if anybody has been really excited about what we do with the Friends, we'd love to have you get in touch. And we also operate the used bookstore down on Friendship Street under the benevolent hegemony of Barbara Brewer. So we're always needing people to help out with sitting at the desk there and running the place. It's not hard, I can do it. So, and it's a lot of fun, because you also get first dibs on the place. But Michael is one of the most colorful and active members of our town. He's a member of the board of directors at the Waldo. He won an election to the budget committee, and he's involved with the plans for the park at the Sylvania site. So if you haven't gone online to fill out that form for the Sylvania site, please do it. He holds a doctoral degree in American Studies from Yale and a BA in Gender Studies from Dartmouth. Most recently, he was a research scientist at the Center for the History of Emotions at Berlin's Max Planck Institute for Human Development. Now, I don't know what rock I've been living under that I didn't know this place existed. It sounds fascinating. He's an actor and a writer. He co-authored the book You Can Tell Just by Looking and 20 Other Myths About LGBT Life and People, which was a finalist for the Lambo Literary Award in Nonfiction. He's a podcast host and hosts conversations with authors of new books for the series called New Books in American Studies. And tonight, he'll be talking about the emotional history of Waldoboro. Can't wait to hear you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to the library for hosting me. Thank you to Anne for inviting me. And thank you all for being here to listen to what I have to say. To answer your question about the Center for the History of Emotions and what I did there, is this talk. So basically, I'm trying to find a practical application to the research I was developing in Berlin. And my laboratory is Waldoboro. So I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes and then open it up for discussion, conversation, debate, questions. Waldoboro has a lot of pride. People feel pride through their involvement in a community, centrally over time what they do there for a living. And the industries based there, whether they're on the water or land or in factories, as was the case with the Sylvania light bulb factory, the last big employer in Waldoboro, before the factory closed in 2006 after employing about 600 people at its height. These jobs, like so many across the country, were tied to big business, and so they were let go by big business. These businesses leave town when it suits them. They don't take care of those that they lay off, and sometimes they even leave the people behind with polluted land. It has happened across America. It is particularly true in rural areas that have long supplied urban centers. For a lot of American history, Maine has been a producer of raw materials and a site of mass industry for centers of population and government, which for Maine was land to the south, all the way back to the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the 17th century. All over rural America, much of the good brought by factories has turned to long-term bad, a quick rise and a long fall, exploitation of resources and people, and overall, structurally, an abusive relationship. The effects are clear across America as well. Loss of jobs, no new jobs at the same scale, nothing much new happening in towns, feelings of despair, shame, worthlessness, feelings of being rejected, unloved, forgotten, lost, self-medication, drug abuse. Out of these feelings, people react in rightful anger and resentment, and sometimes it expresses itself maliciously. In recent times, that anger has been harnessed by certain political figures who also capitalize on the feeling of isolation that people can experience in rural America. While there are people who actually feel despair, there are also those, more powerful, who exploit it, some of whom are local and otherwise doing just fine financially. These exploiters are bad actors. But what a show they put on. Have you been to the Trump Wall recently? It is an impactful theatrical set piece that has become a staging ground for conflict. A sign now reads something like, "Liberals not welcome unless you're on the Trump train." This incendiary hoopla misdirects the legitimate despair and rightful distrust toward what big business and industries have left rural America, less and less, and pins it on the federal government or some other distant, hard-to-grasp entity. I'm not defending the government. I'm just accurately describing the situation and how the objects of very real, heartfelt emotions are redirected through fictional narratives. And it can feel unfair to hold big business and industry fully accountable. For how could people not appreciate business owners who create jobs? Unfortunately, this has also given business people an outsized influence in politics, reducing support for employee protections and increasing tax policies generous mainly to those big businesses. Feeling forgotten with no direct access to the people who make decisions that hurt them, the forgotten become bullies or ideologues themselves, even displacing their own frustrations and vulnerabilities onto the drug addicts that only need to be swept out of view or locked up for the problem to be contained. Either way, people are rightfully angry, surely needing more control over their lives, but also wanting to be recognized, again, as dignified people. So, while they are depressed because little is happening, they also do not want to give up any power and sense of place they can still muster. This confuses the need for control with the desire not to change things. And out of this conflict, and out of their anger, they lash out. One last way to feel in control, and they become uncooperative and increasingly tribal. Their posture is protective and defensive. It's a sore, sour, wounded stance. You can hear it in the revving of engines and the fast driving through town, which is also an effect of having to drive to another town for many basic needs. There's little need to slow down here in Waldoboro, let alone stop. I was listening to E.B. White narrate a video about lobstering at the Bath Maritime Museum recently. He said that the lobstering boat, quote, carries men where they all want to go, or the destination that gives the illusion of security and strength. Its strong growl under him, the exhilarating feeling of support. I would say that this has been more generally true with the car, particularly the truck, driving fast, revving the engine because you don't really have much control or support otherwise. It's like the seams of the world can there unravel in a way you feel you're in charge of. The bullies, at least, drown out all other voices. Many people feel afraid. Things remain at a tense standstill, and that becomes the town's identity and its pride. We're good here, move along. No one is wanting or able to ask for the help they need. Large philanthropies and wealthy people don't want to give help then, and no one here is or will be served their due. It has all made me wonder, can a town, like an individual, be traumatized? It seems so. It seems that this town, like many other rural areas around the country, is suffering some kind of communal PTSD. When people don't speak about these things, that's part of the PTSD, of course, and try to cancel out any problems or remain silent, thinking that they will just go away, the silence and the coiled feelings affect the community and the next generation even more, as the silence and the concealment itself is picked up as objects of pride. Young people leave, turn to drugs, or commit suicide. I look around town and see all the invasive plants around people's homes and the ones clouding out the river from our view. And I can't help but feel them as negative feelings taking over, slowly strangling the emotional bottleneck in town. And like the negative feelings around a drug addict, who can't then control them, swamping their world, clouding over this unique place, their own treasured character, making everything look and feel overwhelming and blah, hopeless, taken over by more than a few invasive ideologies. So, if a town, like an individual, can be traumatized, then how do we address that? How could we, as a community, have an emotional reckoning that would clear away the political ideologies and global media narratives that get in the way of seeing the intricacies of individuals' lives and their real needs, that get in the way of knowing more truthfully what their feelings are about, where they're rooted, how they came about, and why they stick around. Sure, these issues and circumstances are common across America, but we all experience them through the place in which we live, and so all a little bit differently. If there is any hope for us, we will have to address how exactly the place of Waldoboro has kept these feelings in place. But that's the only way to find the fullest way out of them here in Waldoboro. Maine was not the area of the country's first community settlements and governments, but the country's first outpost settlements and frontier. Maine was a center of bountiful resources, cod, lumber, fur, and those were the central terms of the New World paradise. The first towns in Maine were company towns, organized to make a profit. But already with the company towns, the men and women there were basically ruling themselves. The class divisions were not as organizationally pronounced as they would be in the developing colonies to the south. If you were in good standing with your neighbor, you could expect equal respect and treatment. This was crucial because the abundance of this paradise was felt as an overly wild abundance, entirely uncultivated land needing to be cleared. And that was far from easy. Optimism for a profit, let alone a new home, was overridden by the fear of being exposed and the immediate need to simply protect yourself. Hence, surviving here required competence, self-sufficiency, and a willingness to assist and cooperate with one's neighbors. Yet, these feelings were exacerbated by another emotional backdrop. What would become, even if we were to restrict our view to the boundaries of this town, a century-long period of war involving Europeans and native powers. Now, this is not the contained war of battlefields. In a still overwhelmingly unknown, borderless world, the feeling of a larger, unseen regional movement of population and sway of power, promulgating directives and enacting a poll of adherence from afar, heightened the feeling of danger, which then more deeply permeated the unknown around the people here, making everywhere and anywhere a space of fear and attack. This was a serious, determining condition of Maine. The more people feel in danger and alone, the more they become suspicious of others, out of their own need for self-protection. That isolation, paired with the conditions of war, put all the relationships here in starker and more looming dimensions. Feelings of distrust towards someone not already part of your tribe, the from away of colonial times, reflected an individual's own unstable sense of identity and survival on the frontier. Anybody not of your tribe was seen as, well, today the tamest word might be meddling. In fact, anybody just outside your view could be felt as from away, a possible enemy, lurking about somewhere. From away. Beyond its playful descriptive status today is also a deep emotional signifier, because it was inherent to the first and ongoing encounters in these areas on all sides. This is a felt reality. It's the feeling of an encroaching unknown, the feeling that an immeasurable, untouchable power or authority is both right here in you, for you finally had authority over yourself in this new world, didn't you? And also somewhere, maybe just around the corner, and also far, far away, somewhere else. And where does that somewhere else begin and end? Being so exposed in this area, with known authority and governance so distant, any others around you were felt both more other and yet nearer than ever before. When things go wrong or feel uneasy around people under such conditions, they take the law into their own hands. For you have to wonder who might come and take your land away. Hence, the importance of creating your tribe, defining your clan through shared social, cultural, and religious values. The earliest, largest group of settlers here were Germans, and they would stay Germans. Compared to anywhere else in New England, this large, heavily cohesive German group was absolutely unique in Waldoboro. Here in the New World, they lived out an old European tradition of feudal authority, where everyone had their natural place on the top or the bottom, where hierarchies kept things in place based on the supposed natural order of the universe. Part of the essential glue of their natural hierarchy was religion. At the outset of the colonial settlements in this area, in the area of this town in the 1750s, there were Lutherans, Reformed Lutherans, and Moravians, differences carried over from the centuries of struggles over land and power in Europe. Now, religion here was not just a set of ideas or beliefs, but the very intersection of the natural world with the feelings of survival, warmth, order, and love that constitute home. For this was, again, an unknown and terrifying new world. When a Moravian preacher finally arrived in the 1760s, quote, "The people looked at him as fixedly and continuously as if they wanted to eat the words from his mouth," end quote. Of course, a religious leader would give hope by interpreting the world as ultimately blessed and generous. But that meant that the ministers had the power to claim authority in the here and now, which quickly took coercive and abusive ends. Fights broke out over who was in charge, and so who got the money and esteem from the believers. And don't forget the underlying conditions of settlement. Everyone feeling anxious for the future and angry at things not being under anyone's complete control. By the 1770s, about 100 Moravians had had enough and left to join their friends in North Carolina. Now, the Moravians deserve more time in our understanding of Waldoboro's history, particularly in what it was about them that was not permitted here and the violence that was used to excise their kind early on. The Moravians were actually a much more radical sect than the Lutherans. In fact, I came across a book a few months back in a used bookstore, and the title was "Jesus is Female, Moravians and Radical Religion in Early America." So you have to understand that the Moravians were experimenting with more radical understandings of equality between genders, a closer, more intimate relationship with Jesus, which would actually become central to what we might call the American religion. And the Waldoboro Historical Society is about to publish the first full English translation of the Moravian ministers who was here in the 1760s, his diary of his time here. It is full of emotions, and he talks about how violent the Lutherans around him were towards him and his fellow believers. These dynamics are also important to understand because the first recorded birth of a colonist here was not Conrad Heyer, the current patron saint of Waldoboro, but Philippine Elizabeth Rominger, born in 1743, a daughter of Philip Rominger, who was part of a Moravian-leaning family in the area. Conrad Heyer's earliest birth date is recorded as 1749. And yet, what's interesting about Heyer in this regard, especially in terms of how many today are proud descendants of him, is that his own father was dead when he was born, and his mother became a Moravian and left the colony. As the Moravians moved out, more and more English people moved in from neighboring towns south, extending the growing colonial power from away, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They brought government, and the town incorporated in 1773. So, if it wasn't for these English people, we'd have no town. They were Federalists, which means that they liked centralized power, if they held it for themselves, of course. And many of them were also Tories, people, or eventually American citizens, who remained supportive of and loyal to Britain. This was because the Federalists of Waldoboro wanted to ensure that trading and shipping could continue through the decades of ongoing war between America and Britain. The Federalist elites here also felt more aligned with the British elites, who were against what was then the revolutionary poor of France. So, now, think about how the poor Germans here could have felt. They tried not to care. They kept to themselves. They were managing fine enough, organizing more and more around their own homemaking, turning inward to family for authority, with others kept more clearly outside. Yes, that kind of organization was something also felt as necessary for survival under these frontier conditions, living on an outpost exposed to the elements. But the Germans felt a sharp difference in culture from the English here as well. Remember, the Germans were feudal thinking. They were quite taken with the English proprietor Samuel Waldo's own feudal drag. Waldo titled himself the hereditary lord of Broad Bay. They weren't interested, these Germans, in any new experiments in government, especially far away as everyone here was from the growing centers of American power. In fact, not only were the Germans not ongoing active patriots, they were in many ways also Tory by default. This is a crucial circumstantial identity because the American government was putting embargoes on trade with Britain. So I'm speaking here of the lead up to the War of 1812. The power-wielding English federalists in town used that fact to whip up support among the poor Germans around, saying that the US government was getting in the way of our maritime livelihoods here, which would of course soon all come together in shipbuilding as the economic and political leading industry. Because of the English, don't you know? Again, if it wasn't for Federalist English money, much from away, the shipbuilding industry would not have developed so strongly here, increasing the hierarchical consolidation of politics and money in town among that class and ethnic enclave. And it was also because of them that, as opposed to the rest of the state, this town, by political party allegiance and votes, was overwhelmingly in support of slavery in the United States. The ships built here were integral to the southern slave economy. So, we're talking about a pretty severe feeling of hierarchy around here. And the consolidation of power in town did indeed bring increased abuse and exploitation, including of the land as the resources depleted, but also of the poor people in the community. The financial elites running the town never tired of finding ways to keep the peasant Germans in line, including restricting their votes and bullying them into support. So, underneath this proud height of Waldoboro's economic prosperity, other feelings simmered. For some of the people here the longest, these included feelings of being left behind or forgotten, of feeling resentment, which was an effect of the abusive power structures of the town. Sound familiar? And yet, it's not so simple. For their feelings were also informed by the ongoing anxiety about the future in a continuously challenging land, and by the anger and frustration over how nothing could be under anyone's complete control over here on the frontier. These feelings were nonetheless expressed at some of the power hierarchies in town, and there was then, too, an inability and unwillingness to deal with them, more, shall we say, these feelings productively. The poor German population had recognized the rich English Federalists' abuse of them as partly the nature of things. They felt, as they did in Europe, that there would always be peasants and always be masters. The English rulers of the town exploited that worldview. So, what we have here is both those at the bottom and at the top economically handling the situation by all, once again, asserting control, which, whatever feelings of self-righteousness that might have kept going for people, increasingly lent the Germans a tribal, uncooperative, and even paranoid mindset. The English ruling the town, most notably Isaac Reed, won. They were clearly also just mean, nasty bullies. Very, very bad news. I want to stress, though, how these forms of conservatism were not simply a result of how the Germans were. Germans elsewhere in America weren't necessarily more conservative than other ethnicities. What we're seeing here is the result of the town being held hostage by a rich English elite, which exacerbated the defensiveness of the already self-protective, angry, and resentful German peasants. The Germans' behavior was a kind of perverse mimic of the English, a mimic performed out of survival as well as anger. And it is in this way that the town as a whole took on these emotional qualities overall. Qualities of being less open, less willing to share power, and less welcome to others. Yes, We all know that steam power and other technological advancements helped bring a close to shipbuilding in Waldoboro. But Waldoboro didn't have to go down with it. The emotional factor is key. When a place becomes overdetermined emotionally, feelings of abundance, in whatever form, slowly decrease and the future feels less open. Erosion and decimation of the land sped up, and businesses and people continued to leave town. Now, by this point in the talk, you should at least be questioning what calling Waldoboro, quote, the home of the five-masted schooner, really means. How much is that ghostly object of pride holding in place that would otherwise fall apart? And I also hope by now, and I do have hope, that you're beginning to feel how as a town, we're still caught in this overdetermined emotional dynamic that defined Waldoboro's so-called great days. There are even still today village versus backcountry border dynamics in Waldoboro. It is very natural to go on the attack when you feel vulnerable or unduly overlorded and taken advantage of by a power seemingly out of your control. The problem is that the divisive squabbles that result, including the abusive power dynamics within individual families, the problem is when those are given ballast, unknowingly or not, by the emotional dynamics of the community's history. The stories we then spew forth, even if cloaked in pride, become the only path of understanding that we have. The structure they give to the community only makes some people feel freer and more empowered, and many more much less so. These feelings even accrue around particular structures and areas of the town, from clannish neighborhoods to neglected buildings, making them feel haunted or not worth others' time or attention. This emotional infrastructure becomes the mold through which the newly born and newly arrived in Waldoboro get the feel of the place, no matter what they themselves feel. Even if you don't want to speed, you start speeding. Even if you want to feel hope, you feel a little bit of despair and start directing your attention and activities toward other towns. It is absolutely true that many people in our community don't have enough money to buy adequate food or clothes for their family and provide most fully for their children. And they don't have the space to think about many other things outside of meeting those needs. In town discourse, they are termed taxpayers who are, to use a common belittling phrase, just struggling to get by. But this reductive image of people's very different individual lives and their own very real and natural turn inward and resistance to outside help is encouraged by the feel of the town. It is all inseparable from Waldoboro's emotional infrastructure, an effect of and held in place by our particular history here. You can enforce laws or throw money or donations at the problems all you want, but until you begin to reckon with the emotional constitution of the town, you will not begin to better the situation at a foundational level. And people in despair will continue to turn to where authority, in the form of political and religious ideologies and or drug abuse, is seemingly most recognizable and assured, flashiest and loudest, or cheapest and quickest. We are all faced with basic foundational questions in life. Questions of shelter and sustenance, natural resources, power, money, and authority, the neighbor and the stranger, dangers and unknown opportunities, and yes, contentment and celebration. And it is through our feelings and emotions that we drive, direct, organize, hold together, give meaning and value to these fundamental foundational questions. I've begun separating out these questions and calling them feelscapes. The emotional infrastructure of any one place results from having answered to these overlapping foundational questions through certain overpowering emotional relations. Indeed, how exactly the feelscapes of a place such as Waldoboro have been arranged and interlock, by whom and for what reason, is what constitutes the history of that place. Even just by identifying the separate but overlapping feelscapes, we can begin to disentangle, at least in our mind, some of the well-worn and partly immobilizing emotional infrastructure of a place. Indeed, we can continue to make history only by resisting answering the foundational questions of life in one or two ways, such as by a particular creed or ideology, religion, or savior, which are all consolidating fictions, inherently disenfranchising and undemocratic. For, in reality, value and meaning is never absolute. The terms of the fieldscapes and many of their emotional expressions exceed any one story and suggest other paths that have also been taken here in Waldoboro before, sometimes in greater quantity, if only much quieter. That's another lecture and another future. A character in a play I was involved in recently had the line, quote, "I believe the future is only the past again, entered through another gate." For her, this character, a scorned woman, that is a curse. But it is much more an opportunity if you have a different approach and mindset, one of movement, exploration, curiosity, openness to what the world puts in front of you. We all do this at some level on a daily basis, and all the more so if we are attuned to the foundational questions of life that get our feelings going. What kind of emotional space does that approach create? It's certainly not defined by only a few basic emotions, such as, for the Republicans, anger and fear, and for the Democrats, joy and freedom. It is a space of the unknown, which includes the many unknown feelings and emotions you may have there. I've been thinking lately that my main objective in life has been to constantly create this open space of feeling, this space of understanding, of truth and sympathy through whatever means. It is the space whereby people re-feel and so reconsider themselves and others and our place together. Move and think more freely as historical beings and feel a new sense of what is possible in life. It is in this space of reckoning where we can see through the fiction that if someone is not of your tribe, they are necessarily out to get you, especially if they're in a position of power, or the fiction that they are irredeemably hopeless, which we sometimes use to describe ourselves if we feel that we don't belong or no one is interested in us. It is in the space of reckoning where we can see through these fictions and re-encounter the other as other, just like you. This is not a completely feel-good space, although feeling good and celebration can result. It is a place of longing. Longing for others, longing for yourself, longing for home. It is full of the sweet pain of being present with others. And that is true sympathy. You have probably entered this space in a structured way before. It is what therapy does, actually, or rehabilitation programs. And by the way, a mental health clinic and a drug rehab center is what I would put next door to the new park at Sylvania if I had the power to do so. The space of emotional reckoning is also created by the doing of history and the making of art. In terms of history, it is the work I'm doing here right now, and that I've approached on our feet with my emotional history walks, and that I'd like to do with the new Town Origins Committee. The goal is not to form a stronger personal identity or tell a newer story, let alone knowing who you really are. The goal is rather of knowing where and how you stand in the overlapping, time-spanning fieldscapes of Waldoboro. That means living in a historically accountable way. Now, I don't mean being accountable for what someone did or did not do in the past and offering recompense for that today. I mean being accountable for how you stand now, over or under who or what and why. A stance that is always within and activated by the historical space-time of your community. the more you know about what has happened in that space, including where there was once another person that lived or worked, is sometimes only revealed through archaeology, the more accountable we can all be, and the fuller our feeling for our place in the historical space of our family and friends, of Waldoboro, of Mid-Coast Maine, of New England, of America. It is all brought into being through emotions. And the particular emotional makeup of your relationships, the nuance and capaciousness of your feeling toward others, or lack thereof, reveal what kind of person you are in that space. That is where the art lies, the dramatic art. How vulnerable and responsive, or real, can we be with each other there? Keeping open the foundational questions of our lives. For that is how we progress in a historically accountable way. And it too cannot be contained in a story that you tell about yourself, stories that many times become the blown up fictional snags we all get wrapped up in. In closing, it's crucial to remember that this more open, that is, historical, way of being is about increased awareness and responsiveness, not to a particular event or moment of the past or present, but to the set of circumstances, conditions, and relations of a particular place. That is, to the ongoing question of our historical origins. For Waldoboro and its environs, that means living on or near a coast, still an outpost in many ways, or, in emotional terms, living or feeling on the edge. We have to make do with what we have here, sometimes more so than in other places. There are fewer people and institutions to protect you here. This edge is thus a place of potential trauma, as it always has been. But because of those very same conditions, it is also the place of most potential, a place for not just survival, but resilient adaptation, for rejuvenation and inspiration, for more creative expression, for more openness, if you can sit with your vulnerability, especially when something from away comes into your space, no matter if it's been living just around the corner or the next town all along. And the questions that arise out of the confrontation with that which feels away from you are, at their origin, a good thing. They speak to the biological diversity of this place. I heard a biologist talk about heterogeneity being a distinguishing feature of the Gulf of Maine because of all the nooks and crannies and land and water masses and various kinds of habitats that creates. In a sense, that is true for the human population here as well. The difference that accrues in heterogeneous environments is the kind of productive conflict that generates new ideas and new culture, new life. Living on the edge means being attuned to and acting within this heterogeneity and the varied abundance that it necessarily brings. Recall what I was saying about how you act in historical space. It is a skill that I believe is best shown and cultivated through the dramatic arts, and we don't have time to get into that either, but I hope the Waldo Theater is listening. Indeed, the unique conditions of life around here encourage a kind of performative quirkiness among Maine residents. A performance of life that gets people thinking, that provokes, and we all know more than a few of those characters in town. Characters that you meet in the grocery store, or at the post office, or at the library, or at a town meeting. Maybe that performative quirkiness is the most openly shared and motivating character of the town that has worked against its hierarchical closed-mindedness. Something was opening the community up as well, something of our origins, making it quirky, eccentric, and in that sense, more American from the beginning. Examples of that would also be another lecture. And that is true, of course, not only for this town, but that performative quirkiness combined with the forms of classless cohesion, distance and question of authority, frontier outpost location, that combination has arguably made Maine feel independent,
a progressive vanguard for political change, the margin where change can be first felt. We must follow these good actors, the frontiers people, the quirky outliers, the eccentrics, the artists, the people exposed to and receptive to the edges and seams of life's currents, which, by the way, is where lobstermen and clammers work, so they have special access to it as well. Holding the space open to let accumulate diversity, beauty, art. That is, the more foundational arts of creation, survival, and development. The more truthful arts than the fiction spun by the bad actors of the world. When I hear someone espouse a view or belief, I try to ask of them, to what degree is this person responsive to their immediate situation? To what degree are they listening instead of drawing their curtains of ideology over the ever-new world that have been developing all around us for millennia? How much are you emotionally and organically responding to the place you stand, without ideological intervention or other top-down, globally circulated party lines and basic emotions? How well can you adjust and respond to the conditions on the ground, what a gardener or a farmer knows how well to do? Working at the seams and re-encountering the questions that animate our origins and instigate the feelings and emotions that continue to structure our lives and homes. The unknown and the supernatural that people encounter in remote, rural places, always open to something else, something more. What is it about water that gives a feeling of possibility, of life, and abundance of peace? People have been encountering here an abundance of the new or newly made for millennia. Lots of it came through on ships. Different animals and plants, people and things have kept us curious, keeping open the fieldscapes of time. How good of a frontier performance can you give? Ever re-encountering the unknown parts of the world, including yourself, and so being ever closer to the very center of things. We have the unique opportunity to do this here, in this town, in this place. If we are open and ready, our feelings will take us there. Ask the people of native descent. Ask the fishermen, the clammers, the farmers, the makers, the artists. Our origins begin at contact. Thank you. So I'm happy to open the floor for discussion or responses or questions.
This isn't for you, but for those of us who've lived here for a while, do we all remember the quirky fellow Girth? Yes. Sure. He epitomizes what you're talking about. He was a wonderful guy. He was bright. He was artistic, but he walked around in the winter with no shoes. Yeah. He painted in my house. I could trust him with anything in my house. One of the best people I ever knew. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's so interesting because I was doing research on what we call the Hofstas house now. And the first owner was Andrew Storer. He's the one who actually built the house, or had the house built. He rose up in class from German descent to become one of the richest people in town. But Jasper Stahl, in his history of Waldoboro, talks about how Andrew Storer had a reputation of being a quirky individual who would mow the lawn without wearing many clothes at all. And if we had more information about these people, of course we can re-encounter them. Unfortunately, there are people in town who are keeping records to themselves in the Storer family who don't want to share that information. And what that does is prevent also applying for historic designation status for the Hofstas house to increase grant funding for the park in Sylvania. So it's all connected. And we all need to be aware at who might have the information and how we can share it. Yeah.
What are the territorial issues in South Waldoboro you're referring to, or wherever it was here earlier?
Well, the families that are living in South Waldoboro now are the families who were the first settler colonial families that moved there in the 1780s and 90s. And
It gets really complicated because
a lot of those families started out living on Dutch Neck, but there was confusion over the patents at the time, and the people living on Dutch Neck early on were required to pay again for their land after they thought they had paid for it from Waldo. And some of them refused doing that, and some of them settled. Some of them left and moved to South Waldoboro. So most of the lots in South Waldoboro were settled on the people who were kicked out of Dutch Neck. And this created an ongoing dynamic of resistance to, speculators and proprietors. And then when you add into that the coming of the English, those who brought the money, many of those English people also were the first speculators in town. And by the way, speculation of land was where the first real money in Waldoboro was made. So there was this long felt and reinstated sort of resistance to the town telling us what to do with our land, how to use our land. I mean, we could get very specific. I mean, I know of an instance where some people living in that area of town were pushing back on being taxed or something about how they were using the land, and they tried to just argue their way out of it by showing up with a number of them in the town manager's office. So anyways, that people still believe that they have a right to do things in a certain way. And again, it's what's important to think about is the emotional root of that. I mean, you could easily say, oh, you don't have a right, this is stupid, we don't have a law, we have a law against that now, forget it. But that doesn't get at why they feel this way and what that's about.
Michael, what would be a change in the town, that would make you think that it was coming to terms, acknowledging, naming, moving past some of what you identify as the ingrained sense of despair and anger?
I don't know. I mean, it's impossible to measure, right? And so it's sort of really hard to like assess on a
Feel.
quantitative level. So qualitatively, right? I mean, I drive around Waldoboro, and I drive around many other towns in Maine, as we all do, as we all have to. And if you're not struck by the difference of the feeling of the town, I mean, you're missing something, right? So I sometimes think of driving through Waldo, I'm like, this is like a ghost town, you know? I mean, half of the very prime real estate in the center of town is abandoned, you know, or like lived in by like one person who needs to live in like a fortress. There's like people just don't care about like what it means to live in a community of other people, and that if you live in a certain place, that comes with certain, I want to say, expectations, if not obligations. And so basically, the look of the town would change. And I almost started talking about that, which is to say, you know, in the 19th century, there was a concerted effort in the development of vernacular architecture. So when you see it, what we're called the connected farmhouse, right? Big house, little house, back house, farm. The development of that structure being quite unique to this area of New England as a response to increasing industrialization at the time, so the rise of factories. So what were these farmers going to do to survive? So they had to diversify their economic output. Okay, they couldn't just do one thing, and they had to think about new ways of creating and selling out of their homes included. And so the consolidation of the structures was kind of the creation of a domestic factory. Okay, but alongside that was a vision that we need to take care of our land and our property. We need to present ourselves in a good way. That's where the terms front yard and dooryard came from, right? So the dooryard was sort of like the center of all the buildings where commerce could happen, where action could go. But the front yard was what looked the prettiest, okay? And there was this whole expectation of self-presentation. There's this wonderful quote, actually in the book, Big House, Little House, Back House, Barn, which is quite good, it's architectural history, of someone saying that we need to make our houses, our homes, take care of our land. We need to do that better in order to keep young people here. That they recognized in the 19th century, as people had for millennia, that the look and hence feel of your place actually changes your behavior and feelings. So when you take care of things and they look nice, you might feel better about yourself. So this is an idea, though, that again, it's not abstract. We can talk about it in the architectural history of this place. And so many places then being the very opposite of that, which is why I was talking about the invasive species. But I'll just end by saying I didn't want to push it because I don't want it to make it seem that if you simply change the look of a place, everyone will feel differently. So it's not the relationship is not so simple, but there is a relationship. It's complex, but it is there.
Julian had that idea.
Yeah, well, so his version was to just push everything that looked ugly away and plaster the walls with the flashiness.
And pick up the trash.
And pick up the trash.
You did that. You did pick up the trash.
In New York City. And so,
So does Hampton.
yeah, right, exactly, right. Again, a strategy that's been around for a while. I think that, yeah, people who say, you know, on Facebook, oh, you can't put a park in Sylvania, it's just gonna become, you know, a drug abuse center with blah, 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 blah. You know, it's just, first of all, that can happen anywhere and everywhere. But also what that shows you is that people do not have faith in the community. They do not actually believe in the community and themselves. That is the problem. The problem is not drug users. I mean, that's in effect a symptom of something else. And what I was trying to do with this talk is just begin to find a language, at least, to start talking about these things. I'm not saying I found the way, but I just feel that we need to develop a framework in that direction. Yes?
I wonder how, I live in Bremen, so I'm a Bremenite and I don't really, I'm from away. Anyway, there are so many businesses here in town, Damascata, all along the mid-coast that are desperate for people to work in them. How do we reach the people that could possibly make a place affordable for these folks to live, therefore work, therefore staff,
Right.
therefore build our economy?
Yeah.
How do we do that? What is the psychology of that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would say, yeah,
I know it's political, I'm sorry.
no, it's not. Again, it's not, for me, it's emotional. Like, when someone says it's religious, I say, no, it's emotional. And of course, hopefully you hear that it's in a nuanced way. I don't want to I'm not trying to simplify things. I'm trying to make them more complex that way. You know, we live in a world where, like, you know, there's a lot of value held in real estate, and this is tied to American notions of owning property and property rights. In fact, one of the projects that I want to do with the Origins Committee is about the changing value of land over time. So look at any one parcel of land and show how the value changed over time, not just because it's the real estate market or contemporary valuation, but because it was on a river where there was a mill once, and mills were central to the economy at one point, but now that they're not, that land is not worth as much. But then there's so many other values and notions of community that shift with that. Okay, but back to your question. Now we live in a world of how do I make money off my property? I think, well, to be honest with you, I actually would like openly start calling people out for charging too much for rent, for making too much of their property into Airbnb, We don't have as many like rich people as maybe some other area towns, but there are people in this town who can and I think should be giving more money to local philanthropic causes. I think it's a shame that they just want to be left alone. Conrad and I are not rich by any means, but we are in a situation where we can give more, and that's what we're doing. We are trying to ensure the continuation of farming and development of agriculture by working with young farmers and bringing them here in a way that they can afford. So then it means that we're not gonna make money, but we're gonna allow 5 young people to move here. All those 5 people are looking for jobs locally to help support their projects on the farm. So it's up to individuals, and if they're not doing it, and you know they're not doing it, I think they should be called out. Yeah.
Suggestion on how to prevent the Sylvania Park from turning into a drug lot is to let the food pantry put a building in there. Northwest corner.
Yeah, I mean, the food pantry, or as I said, a mental health outpatient clinic, a drug rehab center.
AA meetings,
Fine, great.
you got it.
Yep.
I think if you also appeal to all age groups, I mean, part of the issue of keeping someplace safe is having people there. So if you appeal to parents of young children, but you still have things for young adults to use, like exercise stations or something like that, and still have ADA accessible trails and all of the things that bring each generation there. If you have people there, it'll be a safe space.
Any other comments, questions? Oh,
Why do you
wait,
think?
hold on.
Waldoboro-
Mr. Medica,
oh, sorry.
behind you.
Just on the Sylvania side, we were in Millbridge not too long ago, and they have an absolutely beautifully constructed community garden that we hadn't ever looked at until this year. I was blown away. I took a bunch of pictures. I actually wanted to send them to you
Yeah.
because I thought there was some good inspiration in there. And it addressed all of these factors that we were just talking about, young people, ADA, and I was enchanted. The food that was grown was fabulous. I realize that may not be an issue here, but I then spoke with the caretaker of these gardens who came there just to mow. And the reality of this splendid garden overlooking the water, with many children playing, with teenagers hanging out, my ideal vision was kind of popped a little bit when he told me that, well, the way it came to being was there were 2 master gardeners, they got a grant, they built the whole thing. It was supposed to be a community project. Everybody was helping, everybody was benefiting. And the reality of it is that the garden is being taken care of by the 2 master gardeners and him.
Yeah.
And it is that lack of community involvement that worries me, because we can come with all kinds of wonderful ideas, but if we cannot find a way to engage people from the community to participate, the ownership isn't there. And
Right.
without the ownership,
Right,
there's
right,
nothing
again, I
to
mean,
talk
obviously,
about.
many municipalities have been through these same projects and questions, and a lot of them obviously do the work first, build community buy-in, and I guess I'm speaking towards that, but trying to come at it through emotions and feelings, a different way, and maybe that has sort of larger implications and a broader accessibility for people. But I don't know. This is I'm figuring it out. Yeah.
I've lived here for 23 years, and I have to say, disagreeing maybe with some of the negativity that's being suggested, I think Waldoboro has grown. I have 2 wonderful new neighbors who did you move up from New York City? Yeah, that are in the house next to me. A fabulous old bed and breakfast up on Main Street, and they're doing fabulous stuff with it. The Waldo Theater has brought this town alive. When I moved here, it was very active, and then it went south, and now it's come back. And I live in the middle of Main Street, and when there's a program there are cars packed beyond my house. It's wonderful. So there's some really positive things going on here as well.
It's completely true. I'm involved in many of those things, but I also have to share with you that on the inside, things are always a little more complicated. And there's fear that it's not going to work out, or there's tensions among board members that are so clearly absorbing previous emotional infrastructures. So yeah, it can all, I mean, that's the whole last part of my talk is, of course, it can all happen. It can all happen here, maybe more than many other places. But I also want to recognize how quickly something can be overtaken or overpowered by the negativity. And we need to understand that a little bit more.
So you're talking generational trauma for a whole town?
Yeah, more than a generation of trauma.
Multi-generational,
Yeah.
Multi.
Yeah.
Historic trauma.
One last question.
Go ahead.
So, why is Waldoboro unique in its situation to the other towns on the coast of Maine?
Because of the German settlement early on. There was, most of these other towns were settled by English or Scots, Irish people. And the Germans here held to their, unique ethnic identity, more so than you would have seen elsewhere in the United States, in a rural area that was heightened and had more of an impact. And so it had to do with the Germans here and what they particularly brought, and then how the English who did come in, how they used that, because it didn't go away. It's a very specific, unique conflict between, yeah.
Well, and that's combined with Waldoboro being a one-horse town in terms of businesses.
Well, recently.
Well, 1800s, you're talking about 5-masted schooners. We're
Yeah.
the third largest shipbuilding by tonnage.
Yeah.
And then there was, whatever came after that, then there was a Spanish time, and that pulled out.
Yeah.
Leaving a lot of people unemployed, and nothing's really filled that space. Fortunately, Maine Health is coming in on Depot Street.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd love to keep talking about this. Again, it's really complicated. It's like, obviously, the industry, large-scale industry was central to Maine as a whole, and so many places have seen like deindustrialization happen, but other communities have been able to respond in more creative ways. So the question becomes, why can't we respond that way? And I don't mean relying on tourist dollars either, which is also another way to go. I don't mean that.
So it's a matter of attracting business.
It is, and that, for me, that's an attitude. It's an attitude problem. Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I'm going to step in just because I promised
Yeah.
people that we'd be wrapping up, around 7. Michael is here. You guys are between Michael and the door, so if you want to talk to him, grab his ankles and talk with him.
But in Waldoboro, this is a far distance. This is like from away, you know?
last thing, you did a great job.
Thank you for all being here and just listening. It's all an experiment, and I'm
Really?
figuring things out.
Just
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
really wonderful.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. I know that you're going to be in some shows, maybe you guys may have seen around town this sign about the community talent show on the
Oh,
2nd
yeah.
of November. So
At the
I'm
Waldo,
just
Rebecca Cooney and I are co-producing it, a talent show for Waldoboro
So
at the
anybody,
theater.
read a story, sing a
Yeah.
song, do a dance.
Let us know.
Think about that. For here, November 16th, we're going to have Don Reimer talking about birds. And in December, probably the 7th, but to watch our Facebook page, you'll find out more. Nate Stevenson will be reading some Christmas stories, and there'll be more stuff coming up. It's just, I'm so thrilled to see all of you, and so appreciate you.
Thank you, Aaron.
talking
Thank
with
you
us.
all for coming.
It's just a treat.